Early on in my career, I packed my bags and moved to West Virginia to work as a journalist. I remember my first night there, in my completely unfurnished apartment, realizing I had absolutely nowhere to go. No one knew who I was. I didn't know a single person in the entire state. So after that first night, I looked for community. And part of that, for me, meant looking for the closest synagogue, hoping I'd feel at home there. That's where I first met Rabbi Victor Urecki, rabbi at B'nai Jacob Synagogue. And off the bat, I really liked him, not just because of who he was within the walls of the synagogue, but who he was outside. Living in West Virginia was an amazing, profound, life-changing experience for me. But it was also the first place where people actually said anti-Semitic things to me. Sometimes people I thought were my friends said really hateful things, and they said them to my face. Charleston wasn't always the most inclusive place. I lived just a few blocks from the Capitol, where lawmakers at times passed hateful legislation and said some intolerant things. But I noticed something. Rabbi Urecki was always there. When I'm sure the easier thing would have been to stay away, Rabbi Urecki engaged with the community, often in interfaith conversations and showing up for West Virginians. This ethos stayed with me long after I left West Virginia. This idea of religion as a tool to build community, rather than to keep people apart. And he's been doing it at the same synagogue since 1986. And he's retiring this year. So I wanted to talk to him about it. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Okay, so take me back to the first time you visited Charleston. What was that? Where were you coming from and what was that like?
I was 24 years old, and after 4 years undergraduate, 4 years in the seminary, you go to the placement office on the fourth floor of Yeshiva University at that time, and they have their list at that time of congregations that were available and open. And Charleston kind of fell under the radar, but it was recognized because they had a rabbi here who was still living. His name was Rabbi Samuel Cooper, and he was the rabbi that was here in Charleston for 49 years. And one of the early graduates of Yeshiva University. And even though the congregation was traditional, not really orthodox, men and women sat together, they used a microphone. As a courtesy, I remember talking to the rabbi at the placement office. They thought this would be a nice place for me to come for my interview, just to get my feet wet. Certainly, there's no obligation for you to be there. We have other places that are much more traditional. When my wife and I came down here and we saw the people here, I immediately accepted the job. I just loved it. We had such a great experience, not just from the congregation, but I met the rabbi at the temple, which was unusual. He was at services on Saturday morning, not acting as a spy. He comes normally on Saturday mornings to the synagogue. And then the afternoon, my wife and I, it was a beautiful March afternoon. We were walking on the boulevard near the Canal River, and people were coming up to us. They saw my head covering, my yarmulke, and saying, "Shalom, we love the Jewish people and welcome." It was just such a overwhelmingly friendly group of people. We either thought this was either going to be a very scary moment when we get back and we're going to find out this is like a horror movie, or the people are genuine, and we found it to be very genuine.
When we started this, I kind of had this feeling about myself that I have always been Jewish, but just never really had the right, I didn't have my footing. As I kind of went on, I started to learn more about patrilineal descent. I'm 3/4 Jewish, and that by Reform standards, I don't fit the bill because I was not raised Jewish. And that really kind of led me on a spiral.
I will tell you, I did not know your background before. I felt you were part of the Jewish community. Nothing's changed. Thanks. in my view. We see someone that wants to or might want to identify with the hopes, the dreams, and the aspirations of our people. My view has been, especially of late, in my growth as to try to understand what I understand about Judaism. I want people to be part of this family. And the family comes in so many different ways. We come in through marriage, we come in through blood, we come in through a whole host of different reasons. And I'm less about asking questions about a person's background and more about talking to them about what questions do you have and how can we make you a part of this community. We'll figure that out later. I mean, life is messy, and religion is also messy at times too. I always think about what my father said. I mean, Hitler didn't, look very carefully whether someone was Jewish and then have to need proper documentation. And so if somebody puts their foot in the door or thinks about puts their foot in the door, you want to have that door open for them.
Yeah, well, thanks for saying that. I mean, you feel that way even though you're affiliated with the conservative movement and
Yeah, I'm no longer affiliated. I never was affiliated with the conservative movement. My congregation is.
Okay.
I was actually, which makes it even more dramatic, I was ordained in the Orthodox tradition.
Okay.
And so the Orthodox tradition, what I'm saying is a lot more controversial. But I've always felt some of these things, but I wouldn't say I had to drink the Kool-Aid, but I had to walk the line because I was a member of the Orthodox movement. And yeah, I know the arguments and the reasons for why it has to be this way, but living in a small community where we're about survival. We're about trying to maintain a Jewish community in a very beautiful but isolated area. Just to go back a little bit in history of Charleston, the Jewish community is divided up into two different, I guess, nationalities, especially when they first came.
Okay.
You had the German Jews that came in the 1870s. They became the Reform community of Charleston, West Virginia. The second wave of Jews were the Jews from Eastern Europe, and they became Congregation B'nai Jacob in the late 1890s, like I think 1894. And this congregation started actually as part of someone's house, which eventually, as more people were coming in from Eastern Europe, the community grew. They had a butcher. Next thing you know, they had a rabbi. Then they have a building, and then they buy a old Methodist church downtown, and that becomes the first B'nai Jacob Synagogue building. Eventually, because of the continued growth, especially right after World War II, the community was large enough that it needed a bigger building, and that's why it moved in the late 1940s to this location. And this building was built for, at that time, 405 families.
This might be super elementary, but I just want to understand. So you said that you're Orthodox and the congregation is conservative?
Yeah, that's not a bad question. That's an important question. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, in a fairly typical American Jewish home. Both parents were Jewish. We attended services about as regularly as most American Jews did prior to a son or a daughter getting close to bar bat mitzvah, which means during the high holidays, maybe an occasional service here and there. If there was an anniversary of the death of a loved one, my father would come for yortzeit. We didn't keep kosher, but we didn't eat pork and shellfish. I mean, those are the typical American Jewish family.
Yeah.
As it got closer to my bar mitzvah, my parents became much more active, as many families do. And at that time, the closest congregation, and the one that probably fit our needs, was the conservative congregation in Portland, Oregon. And that's where I was bar mitzvahed. So I was a member of the conservative congregation, but I could tell you nothing about the conservative movement. We're conservative. We're not Orthodox. We're not Reformed.
Right.
Reform's too liberal. Orthodox is too strict. Conservative is the, baby bear just right. Then when I started studying with my bar mitzvah teacher, who was a Holocaust survivor, who trained children of all denominations, and he was an amazing man of blessed memory. I wear his prayer shawl during the high holidays in his honor. He impacted me a lot, and he was Orthodox. So I gravitated to the Orthodox tradition. We started keeping a kosher home, and I started understanding the importance of tradition and the importance of the Sabbath, kashrut. We don't eat pork and shellfish, but now suddenly I want to separate milk and meat dishes, not mix milk and meat, not drive on the Sabbath, etc. So I gravitated toward the Orthodox, and then when I made that decision that I really wanted to serve the Jewish community and be a rabbi, I went to the Orthodox seminary. I was ordained in the Orthodox movement. I became a member of the Rabbinical Council of America, which is Orthodox. And that's by odyssey and how I came to Charleston, where this congregation was not conservative, but at the same time, it wasn't totally Orthodox, but it was Orthodox leaning.
Okay.
It was the orthodoxy of maybe the 1960s, if you will, which means fairly traditional.
Okay.
The conservative movement and the Orthodox movement were not huge differences in the 60s, early 1960s. The idea of observance of Jewish law, halakha, were identical within the Orthodox and the conservative. The only difference you might have is the conservative movement would permit their laity to ride on the Sabbath. They might permit certain foods to enter the synagogue that might not have kosher supervision, but in the olden days, that was always considered to be kosher, something that was maybe baked in a home, but there was no lard or anything in there. That would be the difference between the conservative and the Orthodox. And this congregation was pretty much like that. So it was an easy fit for a rabbi who was Orthodox but came from a conservative background and kind of understood what this congregation was all about.
And so where do you fit in?
Well, when we became part of the conservative movement, and we did that for a couple of reasons. We tried to bring the two congregations, the Reform and the Orthodox, together. One of the reasons we did is the extraordinary relationship the rabbis had and the good relationship the temple and the synagogue had.
Sure.
And we're very small. We're not financially challenged, either of us. We have a good congregation, and they have a good congregation. They have members that are active. We have members that are active, and we attend each other's services, etc. We began having those conversations where if we could put the two congregations together, and with the money in one building, we could really create a Jewish community center of West Virginia, almost like what is in Washington, a congregation called Sixth and I.
Oh, yeah.
It would be with so many different expressions of Judaism. Yeah. So Friday night, as reform as you want. Saturday, as traditional as you want. Programs, we'd have an enormous budget to bring world-class speakers. Everyone in the community would be invited. And that was kind of our dream. It fell apart because we couldn't decide on a building. And with that, I know it's funny. Space destroyed, spirit in that, which is sad. But we both have nice buildings and they both have good qualities. At that time, Rabbi Cohen, of blessed memory of the temple, and myself, we tried to come up with if you think of the two-state solution in the Middle East, we had the two-congregation solution. Just announced that we are one congregation with two facilities. Yeah. And Jerusalem, which would be the one building, is going to be kicked down the road like the Oslo Accords. In 5 years, we're going to decide on one building. And what do we got to lose? Then we have this memorandum of understanding that we are one community with two campuses. But the thinking was, no, we need to find one building, and the whole deal fell apart. During those discussions, what we found and noticed, or what I noticed, was the Reform community had what was called hashkafa, had a philosophy, because they were part of the Reform movement. The synagogue had always been, because they've only had 3 rabbis, and now it's almost 3 rabbis in 100 years.
Wow.
The hashkafa, the philosophy of B'nai Jacob, was, what does the rabbi say we need to do? It was almost like the old shtetl. The rabbi had complete autonomy and authority over what we need to do. And that's not a healthy dynamic, I thought, because take me out of the picture, especially now with the changes in the Jewish community in those almost now 30 years at that time. The conservative movement is different. The Orthodox movement is different.
Right.
Who are they? And so they began a discussion about, what is B'nai Jacob? And that's when we joined the conservative movement. And they were worried because they said, what would that do for you? And I said, don't worry about me. I think I'm secure in where I am. So we joined the conservative movement. Women started participating fully at B'nai Jacob Synagogue. I think it was in 2017. It made the front page of the Charleston Gazette. It's right behind me right there. You can see it over there. I love
it.
Yeah. And that day I got a call from the Rabbinical Council of America. Who knew that they were getting the Charleston Gazette every day? Either that or it was a disgruntled congregant that wasn't happy with women being involved.
Leaked it, yeah.
And they said, we need you to resign or we're going to expel you from the Orthodox movement. And that hurt. And it's funny, I've always been at a distance of the Orthodox world because I was uncomfortable with many of the practices. And maybe that's why I found such a home here in Charleston, because it fit. It allowed me to do my own shtick, if you will. Traditional, but traditional light, okay? Make the changes that are practically necessary without having to look over your shoulder. when I got that call, I was just devastated because it's the only thing I knew. I was an Orthodox ordained rabbi. What am I going to do? And my wife told me, said, this is going to be the greatest day of your life. And I said, what do you mean? She says, you're going to finally really, truly feel unencumbered. You can speak not as an Orthodox rabbi, but as a teacher again, what you really believe. And it did open the door to so many different things. And so I'm no longer Orthodox. I didn't join the conservative movement. I'm in between denominations, if you will, okay, in between relationships. And as a result, I'm able to look at all of them and find the astonishing beauty of Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox, and enjoy what all of them have to offer. Suddenly I started speaking very openly about my desire and want to perform interfaith marriages. Why the LGBTQ community, and if they want to have marriages, I want to be part of their experiences. I mean, I didn't have to look over my shoulder any longer about the Orthodox or even the conservative, which the conservative had the same guidelines. And it was very liberating, and it's turned out to be a very good blessing. So what am I? I'm just a simple Jew that's just trying to figure it out like you, Kate.
Well, it's very heartening. And I will say I was very attracted to your congregation because it felt, and you felt very liberal to me. And that's what I kind of, if my family had to pick a congregation, it would have been Reform. Or that's kind of where I went to bar and bat mitzvahs. Mm-hmm. And I always kind of didn't understand that, like, I thought conservative was conservative. Why does this feel more welcoming? Why does this feel more accepting of me and other people? I want to hear more about your interfaith. Actually, I didn't really realize that interfaith marriage was kind of controversial. And I've now heard from a couple different rabbis who have conflicting beliefs. And I want to hear what you think and how you've managed to kind of find a way to do that within your congregation.
It's funny. I've saved all my sermons, and I can go back and read some of these sermons, and I'll be mortified with it because I know the positions I've taken with regards to interfaith marriage. Did I truly believe that in my heart? Maybe, I guess. But the thinking always is, and that part I do understand. The Jewish people are small.
Yeah.
Okay? And my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, they never understood intermarriage because they thought this was the nail in the coffin of the Jewish people. Because once someone marries out of the faith, the chances are very likely that the children will not be raised Jewish, and that's the end of the Jewish line. And I got that, and I understood that. And that's why, I could have never married someone out of the faith just because of that. My father, growing up in Argentina, and he uses words and language, and he knows, we've talked about it. He no longer does it, but that was the language that people used. His father would say, never come home with a shiksa, and the word shiksa is a very disgusting word. It means something that's creepy or crawly. Okay. But if you understand the tenacity of the Jewish people and that will to survive as a people, to suffer down through the centuries and to have a son or a daughter marry outside the faith. That's what you see in the movie Fiddler on the Roof, et cetera. That idea, that I got that, and I spoke about that. But I also spoke with the idea that we need to find ways to bring interfaith families together. But the turning point was maybe it was because of my experiences here. When I came here, I was seeing people that were raising kids Jewish that are part of an interfaith family. Sometimes the spouse converted. Sometimes the spouse felt that they had to convert to please the grandparents, etc. And suddenly they're keeping a kosher home and they're really enjoying it. But I was also noticing people that are getting it right. They were raising their families, sometimes in both, but they were giving them a good education about the Jewish tradition because they were part of our community. And I realized that the interfaith marriage was not an act of rebellion, but purely an act of love. And I started feeling very uncomfortable that I'm having to say no to welcoming them. And here is a person who actually is coming to a rabbi because they were bar mitzvahed here, or she was bat mitzvahed here. And the very first conversation I would have with the person that's going to spend the rest of their life with that person is, I'm sorry, I can't do this. And it just didn't make sense to me, as opposed to saying, let's work together on this. And let me share our people's traditions. Let me share why this has always been a problem. And let's see what we can work through. That's an opportunity. That's not a problem. So I've created in the last few years, these marriages or these ceremonies of love, where I take out the language or the pieces that the traditional Judaism would find, oh, you can't do that because that is a Jewish marriage. And the couple doesn't care. The couple knows. I said, do you have a problem with us? It says, no, what do we care about this? That, behold, I am married to you according to the laws of Moses and the people of Israel. We find a passage from the Hebrew Bible or tradition that would speak to both of them. And it becomes a ceremony that's both meaningful, spiritual, and I add Jewish. And I get emotional when I do it because I wish I could have done this earlier. I wish I should have done this earlier. I wonder how many more people might have been part of our tradition.
It sounds like in a lot of ways you're reacting to, not to say that you're not doing this on your own, but you're adjusting to kind of reality of the world. And I wonder, I think there's another component here, which is declining population that you've kind of alluded to. And I wonder how you adjust to that reality of people today.
Yeah. For me, it's really and I'm speaking to you, Kate. When I hear your story, I want you to be a part. If this is where you want to be, I want you to be a part of it. That's what a rabbi is supposed to be, I think. I mean, a rabbi is supposed to be a teacher. A rabbi does not mean priest or minister. He or she is not performing, duties that suddenly, God is pleased about that. No, we're teachers. We're storytellers. We're myth makers, if you will. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean, we create through these rituals, ceremonies, studies, we create memories that are lasting for families and for people, that when they need it, it's there for them. Because that's what religion is. Religion, it binds us to each other. It binds us to something beyond us. It reminds us that it's going to be okay. And those are opportunities. And if someone is coming to me, and I realize it not so much because of declining membership, but because after so many years, some of these people, I was at their birth. I was at their bar mitzvah. They were at my Sunday school. I've stayed in touch with them through Facebook. They're family. And these are people that are actually coming back and saying, we've got something very significant in our life I want to share with you. Would you help us? That's a joy. That's what we're all about. That's what we should be all about. Now, answering directly your question about declining membership, it's of concern, but at the same time, we've always been very small, and we've always survived. That's another thing I'm thinking. We tend to over worry. Jews worry a lot, and the younger people are not coming to synagogue and stuff like that. We've had a lot more challenges than that. I mean, we've had situations where there is pogroms and a Jewish community is completely wiped out. There's the Holocaust. There's the Inquisition. I mean, there's 2,000 years of historical context that we understand that the Jewish people are in decline. And yet we survived because it's about an idea. It's about a people's walk through history. It's going to continue. It might be different and it might look different, and there might be different explorers of that walking that path in the future, but it's going to survive.
After almost 40 years, I want to know what's on your mind and how you've evolved on these big things that I've been thinking about for a year: God, atonement, prayer.
That's great. That's a great question. Thank you for saying that, because that's a great question I've been thinking a lot about. It's funny, I look back with both mild humor at the things I used to believe or the things I thought were important. Sometimes with horror that I couldn't believe these are the things I preached or believed in. But I also see an evolution, and prayer is much more meaningful to me now than it's ever been. And I notice it when I pray before the congregation. The words resonate more deeply than they've ever, even though I would say if I Do I believe those same words the way I understood it back then? No, not at all. Do I understand God the same way? Not at all. Study of Torah, of our text, is more glorious, it's more colorful than it's ever been for me. I can't wait to study Torah with the congregation, which we do every week. The Talmud, it's gone from, this is our people's traditions, these are the things that are important, these are what we believe, to it's an opportunity to see the same texts that my ancestors saw and look at it with a new pair of eyes. And that's what I'm seeing every single time I open the Torah text, every single time that I pray. The words resonate more deeply than they've ever done. And it's because it's been an evolving tradition, because I'm unshackled by, it's got to mean this, or I don't know what it's got to mean. And I'm not saying tell me what it means. What is it saying to me today? And how is it speaking to me today? That's so different than it was for me 40 years ago.
And how about your relationship with God?
God reminds me I'm not alone. That's all it is for me. It just, I have no expectations of God. I used to wonder, why does God allow this? Those are the questions, I guess, that are important. And that I guess at a certain age, how come God allows evil to happen in the world? Those things, and again, through time, it doesn't matter to me as much as I just don't want to live in this world alone. And knowing that there's something out there, and I don't know what it is. And the more I try to think about it, the more confusing it gets, and the more complicated it gets. Again, letting go. Letting go of the things that you have to believe in. Is God infallible? So, I don't know. All I know is there's something that has drawn the attention of human beings that create the upward reach constantly through generations. And that's happened to me too. As a young kid, believing in God, cosmic bellhop. If you do this, this is what's going to happen. And it's no longer that. Now it's knowing that the world makes sense. The world is going to work. My life matters. The relationships, I'm connected not just through the connection of our humanity, but of the shared spirituality that we can share together. I'm feeling that right now when I'm talking to you, Kate. I mean, I feel the presence of God here. And what does that mean? I don't know. I don't know what it means, but I feel good. It's like that little bit better I feel today, because we're talking about things that are much more important to me than, the price of gas or, the mundane stuff.
Yeah.
We're talking about things that in the end I'll be able to carry with me, because eventually life breaks down, and I see a lot of that as being part of the rabbinate, and it's going to be okay. The world's going to be okay.
I want to ask you about retiring. What was on your mind, and why now?
The ultimate reason is it just feels like it's time. Mm-hmm. That's not a very good answer, but that's probably the right answer, at a certain point. It could have been because I had open heart surgery, 2 years ago.
Wow.
And I had during COVID, I was hospitalized for 11 days, not because of COVID, but just something. But I understood that life is much more fleeting than I imagined. Mm-hmm. It's almost like that change where you think you're immortal and you realize you're not. And it's not like I'm scared. It's like, oh my gosh, I better get right with God. No, it's just that I know that life is short, and I want to spend more time with Marilyn, my wife, with the kids, my grandson. And I want to start a new chapter, because I know that this book is going to close soon. And it might not be soon, but that reminded me of it. So I think that's why I felt I've always wanted to leave on my terms. I want to leave Michael Jordan didn't do it exactly right because he went on retirement, but I'd like to leave after you hit a 3-point shot to get the championship. And I think I'm doing pretty good right now. There's some other reasons. Funerals really hurt more than ever, because these are families. When I hear someone is going through cancer or someone's at hospice, the change now is both sadness, and I'm losing someone I love and care for very deeply, but also I have to be the comforter in chief, and it's hard. And it's getting harder and harder to do that all the time. I can't sleep. I get so emotionally attached. I cry a lot during funerals of not relatives. These are, but there are relatives. They're family now, and that's difficult.
Wow.
And it's very impactful in a small community because, it's not like you do like 4 funerals a week but they're not members and stuff.
Yeah.
No, these are people that I've grown up with. They've guided me in life. They're like parents. They're like, older brothers, and it's, and I will share something else, and I'm going to share it tomorrow, my thought for Shabbat. I've always been terrified about speaking in public. And I've lived my whole life like that.
Wow.
Here I was, wanted to be a rabbi,
Yeah.
and I realized I'm scared in front of people. Before we got online, I got, it's like, oh, I hope I don't mess up and stuff. And I've been doing this forever, but that fear, and it's going to be nice to have that lifted. I think that I don't have to do that all the time. I've overcome it. I had great speech and drama teachers that helped me overcome this fear.
Uh-huh.
I share that fear with my bar and bat mitzvah students because they're afraid they have to get up on that big day. And I said, let me talk to you about me. Let me tell you how hard it is for me, and we can do this together. It's going to be nice not having to worry about that all the time.
What about other things that, I don't know, you're very involved in the Charleston community, and also you have spent 40 years at this synagogue. Are you going to go as a congregant, or are you going to still be kind of a voice of, religion and justice in Charleston?
I mean, the most honest answer I can give you, I don't know. I got to be very careful because I want my successor to have the space to succeed, whoever he or she will be. That's always a problem when a rabbi stays or a minister stays in a congregation or a community. I need to be careful about that. So that's where I'm hesitant saying, I'm still going to be doing this type of thing.
Yeah.
Because it's not fair to the next rabbi. That's why it's kind of exciting to me, because it's a new chapter. It's a chapter that I haven't written yet, as opposed to, no, this is what I'm going to do. The only thing I know is I'm going to read a lot more comic books and do a lot more Lego with my wife. That's about all my plans right now. But, people say, you can write a book. No, I'm not even thinking about that.
Yeah.
I am blessed that both my parents are living. My dad's going to be 91 and my mom is 90.
Wow.
I want to spend a lot more time with them.
They're very lucky to have had you for almost 40 years.
I feel I've been given a gift. Look at where I am. Look at where I started and look at where I am. I started as an Orthodox rabbi, and this congregation took me in and, if you will, guided me on a path that I never thought I'd be on. My last sermon for the high holidays this year was, the long and winding road, taking a quote from the Beatles.
Uh-huh.
Life is a long and winding road. Never thought